lavada sea la mano, buena para remediar. Alabado el olvidado, alabado el olvidado en cualquier rincón del mar.
In terms of struggle, when we talk about people, we're talking about the 600,000 Cubans without work, who want to earn their daily bread honestly without having to emigrate from their homeland in search of a livelihood. The 500,000 farm laborers who live in miserable shacks, who work 4 months of the year and starve the rest, sharing their misery with their children, who don't have an inch of land to till, and whose existence would move any heart not made of stone. The 400,000 industrial workers and laborers whose retirement funds have been embezzled, whose benefits are being taken away, whose homes are wretched quarters, whose salaries pass from the hands of the boss to those of the moneylender, whose future is a pay reduction and dismissal, whose life is endless work, and whose only rest is the tomb. The 100,000 small farmers who live and die working land that is not theirs, looking at it with sadness of Moses, gazing at the promised land, to die without ever owning it, who like feudal serfs have to pay for the use of their parcel of land by giving up a portion of its produce, who cannot love it, improve it, beautify it, not plant a cedar or an orange tree on it, because they never know when a sheriff will come with the rural guard to evict them from it. The 30,000 teachers and professors who are so devoted, dedicated, and so necessary to the better destiny of future generations, and who are so badly treated and paid. The 20,000 small businessmen weighted down by debt, ruined by the crisis, and harangued by a plague of grafting and venal officials. The 10,000 young professional people, doctors, engineers, lawyers, school teachers, dentists, pharmacists, newspapermen, painters, and sculptors, who finish school with their degrees, anxious to work and full of hope, only to find themselves at a dead end, all doors closed to them, where no ear hears their clamor or supplication. These are the people, the ones who know misfortune, and therefore are capable of fighting with limitless courage. To these people whose desperate roads through life have been paved with bricks of betrayal and false promises, we were not going to say, "We will give you," but rather, "Here it is, now fight for it with everything you have so that liberty and happiness may be yours." These are not my words, but the words of Fidel Castro on October 16, 1953, in his speech entitled, "History Will Absolve Me." When I arrived in Cuba on March 24, 2006, I did so with an open mind and an open heart. I went to meet the Cuban people, visit their homes, taste their food, listen to their music, appreciate their art, experience their culture, and learn more about their lives. Havana is a magnificent city in size, 286 square miles with a population of 2,200,000. The official language is Spanish, and the ethnic population is a mixture of native Indian, Spanish, African from Senegal, Guinea and the Congo, Angola, Mozambique. They are Jewish, Portuguese, Anglo-Saxon, French, North American, and Yellow Mongoloid from Macau and Canton. This wonderful mix of race can be seen in the faces of the Cuban people. The diversity of the culture can be tasted in its food, seen in its dance, heard in its music, and smelled in its sweet, salty, acrid air, and felt in the rhythm of daily life. The Spanish colonial architecture of La Habana is nothing short of a national treasure. Throughout Havana and beyond, there are stunning 17th and 18th century buildings. Some of the most famous are the Church of Havana, the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, and the Museum of Colonial Art. The housing stock is largely comprised of beautifully designed and classically detailed Spanish colonial-style buildings, and to a much lesser degree, apartment buildings that were constructed after the Revolution and appear to be influenced by the utilitarian Russian-style architecture of the 60s and the 70s. Almost all the housing I saw was in overwhelmingly deplorable condition. Block after block, mile after mile, hundreds of thousands of people seem to be living in substandard conditions. While occupants pay very little rent, many homes lack adequate electricity, plumbing, and natural light. Since the revolution in 1959, there seems to have been very little reinvestment in the housing stock, to the point where I wonder if it can ever be saved. The salt air, over 4 decades of neglect, limited building materials, and insufficient funds have jeopardized the stock, and perhaps its chance of ever being restored to its original condition. Since the government owns all the property, there's no incentive to fix it or to maintain it. There's no real estate industry. When people want to move to another apartment, they find someone to swap with. They work out the details, negotiate the terms, and simply swap. No brokers, no fees, and no guarantees. Cubans receive monthly rations for food. The quality is fine, but the choices are limited. Rice, beans, chicken, and pork are staples. Seasonal vegetables and fruits are available, however, stores have very little to offer. Consumer items like toilet paper, soap, shampoo, deodorant, and paper goods are in short supply. Large consumer items like washing machines, air conditioners, televisions, and refrigerators are out of reach for most Cuban families. Furniture and home furnishings are sparse and old. Like many things in Cuba, transportation is complicated. For a few pennies, Cuban city dwellers can ride the public bus, which is called a camel. These buses are not air-conditioned, and apparently there's no limit to how many Cubans can fit in a camel at any given time. We were told that the conditions on the bus are horrendous, particularly during the summer months when temperature and the humidity soar. Some modes of transportation are off-limits to Cubans, while other modes are off-limits to visitors. The older cocoa taxis, called so because they are shaped like coconuts, and the rickshaws are available only to Cubans, while the newer model cocoa taxis are available only to tourists. Operators of taxis and rickshaws are issued a license. They can be stopped by the police at any time and asked to produce their license and fined if they are found violating the law. Cubans are required to carry a national identification card. I was totally captivated by the 1950s American cars and marvel at the ingenuity of the Cuban people as they managed to keep these cars going without access to the manufacturer's parts. The color, variety, and condition of the vehicles were a constant source of entertainment and delight. What is not delightful is the lack of sensibility around transport. People need to get to and from work. I was appalled to learn that folks often have to hitchhike. I saw hundreds of people heading to the highway to thumb a ride home after a busy day at work. While this practice is totally baffling to me, the Cubans I spoke with took it in stride in relative good humor. Pope John Paul II visited Cuba in January of 1998. Since then, Cubans practice their religion with a renewed energy and commitment. The celebration of Christmas has taken on new importance, and while Catholicism enjoys the greatest popularity, it is often combined with the African-rooted Santeria. Protestant churches are also prevalent and include Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian. Everywhere I traveled, I saw hundreds of children wearing their school uniforms. We visited one of the largest and oldest schools in Havana. True joy permeated throughout the building, in the corridors and in the classrooms, with the children and with the teachers. It is old-style teaching, with students sitting at rows of desks, well-behaved, dressed alike, and reciting text. Cleanliness, order, and happiness prevail. It seems to me that Mr. Castro and his government has invested in education, healthcare, and the arts. Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates. The adult literacy rate is 97%, and one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the world, even lower than the United States. And dance, art, and music abound. While hundreds of little girls learn to dance and practice every day after school at the Ballet Litz Alfonso Dance Cuba, young Cuban boys prefer to play baseball. It is the sport of choice, and boys made balls and bats out of anything and everything they could get their hands on. Every day, from morning till night, music is heard. People are humming, dancing, smiling, and enjoying life. Cuba is a strange, wonderful, and complicated place. For the most part, folks live in terrible conditions. They have a shortage of a variety of food. They have very little money. They are highly educated, but because the economy is primarily driven by the tourist industry, they seldom work in the career or the profession in which they have been trained. They cannot own property. They cannot travel outside the country. They cannot rent a room in a nice hotel. It is forbidden. They cannot ride in certain vehicles, and oftentimes must hitchhike if they travel outside the city. There is police presence in the heart of the city at almost every corner. They have very little expendable income, and yet in spite of all of this, they seem quite happy. People respect each other, hold hands in public, care lovingly for their children, and those that I interview wanted all the same things we have and want: a good home, healthy babies, nice food, coffee with friends, books to read, interesting work, and peace, freedom, and liberty. It is their want of peace, freedom, and liberty that weighs me down and troubles me the most. The Cuban people are not free. They are a learned people, an ingenious people, as proven by all those 1950s Chevrolets and Buicks that have been running for over 4 decades. They know what's going on in the world. Those that I spoke to love their language, their culture, and their country. They do not want to become Americans or Europeans or Australians, but they would love the opportunity to visit the United States, Europe, and Australia. They dream of an economy that supports more than just the tourist industry. They hope that one day they will be employed in an area of interest, in an occupation for which they have been trained. Most are ashamed that elderly grandmothers can be found on the streets selling peanuts to the tourist to supplement their income, while others dress up their animals or themselves and charge for the photo op. I met an engineer who waits tables, an English teacher who is a tour guide, because they can earn tips in the tourist industry. Americans are particularly well liked because they are generally considered better tippers than the Europeans. Begging is not uncommon, and children have become uncommonly good at it. Candy is good, but pesos are better. Cuba is located about 90 miles south of the Florida Keys. It is 1,250 kilometers long and range in width from 32 to 210 kilometers. Newly developed hotels and resorts can be found on the island. The amenities are first-rate. Fabulous restaurants, great entertainment, crystal clear swimming pools, and white sandy beaches. Cubans work at these resorts, checking the reservations at the front desk, serving food at the restaurants, cleaning the rooms, and caring for the grounds. But they are not allowed to rent those rooms, take their family to dinner, swim in the pools, or enjoy a drink at the bar. In the buildings, the churches, and the schools, and along the highway, in fact, throughout the country, Fidel and Che are ever present. At first I resented it, and gradually understood it. For better or worse, there was a remarkable revolution in Cuba in 1959. As an American, I am proud of our revolution of 1776, and am glad that pictures of George Washington still hang in our federal and state buildings and schools. I found a parallel, and I lost my resentment. Cubans do not refer to themselves as socialist or communist. They think of themselves as fidelist. They refer to the time since the revolution as the project. Cuba continues to evolve. I asked folks what they think will happen when Fidel passes. The most direct answer was, same dog, different color. There's lots of talk about the embargo. They call it the blockade. I'm not sure if most Americans understand that any time a ship delivers goods to the port of Havana or any other port in Cuba, that ship may not deliver any goods to the United States for 6 months. This is simply unconscionable. I do not believe that Mr. Castro is wanting because of this policy. However, 11 million Cuban men, women, and children suffer every day as a result of it. There is a lack of food, medicine, books, and supplies, consumer goods, building materials, clothing, and electronics. My fear is that the island can actually be purchased, that somewhere in the world, a corporate entity with a pile of cash on the table is just waiting to buy Havana and its people, and that no one in Cuba has the ability to stop it. The developers will come. They will restore the property. They will provide jobs and consumer goods, and with it all the ills of society, crime, drugs, and violence. The culture of art, literacy, well-being, music, and dance, and the genuine goodness of the Cuban people that Castro can certainly take credit for, may be lost. In my opinion, it could be lost because the Cuban people do not have enough. I've thought a lot about freedom, liberty, and how much is enough, and who gets to decide. Mr. Castro has decided for his people, and I believe he has not and does not provide enough. People must be free to choose and free to live life, with all its glory and brilliance and all its consequence and suffering. I was only in Cuba for 9 days. I'm not an expert. Through my photos and my words, I hope to share with you what I saw, tell you what I heard, and what I think. My time in Cuba was short, but hopefully I found some of its essence and perhaps maybe even some of its heart. I spent a lot of time talking to people, Pedro, the engineer who turned waiter, and Jorge, the English teacher who is now a tour guide, and Sonia, the school principal, and Julio, who works at the museum as a security guard. Julio brought me to his house to meet his mother. I asked Julio's mother what she wished for her son. She said she prays that one day he will be able to leave the island and see the world. They all shared their stories with me. I know they were thoughtful, honest, and forthright. They told me of their hopes and dreams for a better life, an easier life, a life like the one Mr. Castro promised, of liberty and happiness. I too have a dream for Pedro, Jorge, Sonia, Julio and his mother, and all the people of Cuba. It is that Mr. Bush will lift the embargo and that Mr. Castro will set his people free.
Dicen que fue un traductor del griego quien le enseñó su mundo imaginario. Tiempo después se había quedado ciego y andaba en pos de un astrolabio. Verónica del Mar es una bruja cari angelical de corazón. Verónica del Mar tiene una aguja bajo su pajar, vedado registrar. Puede cegar Verónica del Mar. Siempre va sola y como a la deriva. La autoridad la ve pero la esquiva. ¿De dónde es? ¿Con quién está? ¿Regresa o se va? Novela más de noche y de ciudad. Verónica del Mar sigue la ruta oculta y fantasmal del malecón. Verónica del Mar es una fruta para saborear a espacio prudencial. Se va a volar Verónica